By the way, everyone say goodbye to Irina.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to say some words.
Totally instrumental in this.
yeah, so
Irina,
Yeah.
you got to say some
Well,
words.
I was wanting to, but then I couldn't
She's
think
not
of anything,
speaking
and I'm
in
probably
the
just gonna like tear up, which is like so uncool.
No,
so this
it's
is a
totally
goodbye of our
cool.
former illustrious president, Irina, and she doesn't want to, but she's gonna say a couple words.
Okay,
Our
my
illustrious
words.
former president.
So, hi, I know not all of you guys know me, but, you know, you guys are in good company of, no, like, sorry. See, it's already bad, like, in good company of all the people who don't know me. No, this forum has been amazing. It's been a privilege to be a part of it. I'm so grateful for, like, I don't know, when I was leaving, I just realized how much of a community it is. And like I can say, like, it's opened up a lot of amazing opportunities for me, and I'm grateful for that. But moreover, I'm just grateful for the people, and like being a part of this has been a great honor, and it's, I don't know, it's wonderful. So that's that. I'm sorry I didn't actually prepare a good speech, but I just want to say thank you for being awesome.
Thank you for running this thing for the last
Thank you.
couple of years. And being really instrumental in the very beginning days of this forum. So, you know, you and Alex moved it along to right now we're in, it's sort of self-perpetuating, which it wasn't in the beginning, so
So
that's fantastic.
And I'm super sorry to not even be able to stay. I'm actually moving on Tuesday, so I've got a house to pack up, and but
Well, Karen's gonna be sad she didn't get to see you.
but I'll be back.
All right,
It's only with
good.
a friend. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, y'all.
Now we're going to continue on. We're going to introduce our lecturer today, Dr. Paul Cwik of Mount Olive University and North Carolina State University. He is currently an associate scholar of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and adjunct faculty member of the Foundation for Economic Education. Dr. Cwik is also the professor of economics and finance at the University of Mount Olive. Today he will be speaking on the Austrian Business Cycle theory. So let's welcome Dr. Paul Cwik.
Okay, so this is part 2 of the other lecture, which was on capital and interest and everything. And so this is an extension of it. Austrians really don't make the division between macroeconomics and microeconomics, at least not the same way that Keynes and Samuelson have done. And so you'll typically see a follower of Samuelson's textbooks where they actually stick macroeconomics first because you don't really need microeconomics. The reverse of this is the Austrians, where they say that it's a building process. And so macroeconomics is just really a built-up, complex look at the market order from an individualist point of view, but just built up more. That's all.
Can I
Okay,
just
so
interject one thing?
sure.
And
This is Roy Cordato being
Auburn.
filmed.
when I first went to Auburn, I was told that they thought that macroeconomics was just another subunit of micro. Just that that's kind of the way Austrians view macroeconomics.
It's a slip in the dialect. Okay.
Yes.
All right, so business cycles. So we have some questions that we need to address first. Although this is, if I was going to play some stuff from John Popola and Russ Roberts on Econ, what is it, Econ Live or something? Econ Talk, yes. So if it's Keynes, it's Hayek, they're doing a battle in rap. It's fantastic. And then there's part 2. So if you haven't seen it, what's wrong with you? Go see it. Well, not right now, but after this. And they also have a Christmas collection of all the hits and everything. It's called Macro Follies. You know, deck the trees with macro follies. Okay, anyway, it's fantastic. You'll love it. But my favorite line from Fear the Boom and Bust is, prepare to get schooled in my Austrian perspective. So, all right, so questions. So a good business cycle theory needs to answer the following questions. The first one is, what is the cause and what's the cure of the cycle? right? So why doesn't just the macroeconomy just grow? Why do we boom? Why does it bust? Why does that happen, right? We need to answer that. And then we have to say, why is there at the very top a cluster of errors, right? Entrepreneurs are paid to get things right. They are paid to make decisions. And we know that when they make wrong decisions, they incur losses, they go out of business. And those that make right decisions, they get more resources to work with. But why is it that they all tend to make the same mistake at relatively the same time and all basically in the same direction? Why? Right? We need to answer that. And then third, what we see is that if we look at the data, what? Austrians looking at data? Yes, we look at data, that there are greater swings in the earlier production stages than in the later production stages. In other words, the stuff that's farthest away from the consumers have these huge swings, but the stuff right near the consumers, they have swings, but not as large. Why does that happen? Now, before we can show how this whole thing goes kerflooey, we need to set up our model and talk about how it goes right. Now, last time we looked at the structure of production. We had different stages. I put 4 different stages up here last time. You guys remember that, right? We had raw materials, then we had manufacturing, then we had wholesaling, and then we had retail. And when we say time, we're not talking about clock time or calendar time. It's just the order of way things work, right? You can't send the tree to the sawmill and then cut down the tree, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so as these goods in production flow through the structure of production, we add to them other original factors of production, such as labor and other natural resources. There's embedded capital at each and every stage. Between each of these, there are markets in which we see financial capital flowing in the opposite direction. And so we have a confluence of both supply and demand curves moving all through the structure of production, coordinating it all. Okay? So as these things become more useful, we see that they gain in value, and so people are more willing to purchase them. And so we see this as an upward sloping curve here. And we sometimes refer to this as the Hayekian triangle. Now this is the first component of a 3-graph model, which was developed by Roger Garrison, who was my dissertation chairman. And it sets a competitive model that we can then use relative to all our other textbook models. Okay. So the second component then is the familiar production possibilities frontier curve. But instead of putting guns in butter, what we do is we have investment goods and we have consumer goods. So basically what we're looking at is, are we producing for today or are we producing for tomorrow? And of course we see that this is bowed, it's not a straight line because of the law of increasing opportunity costs, or the flip side of it, which is the law of diminishing marginal returns, right? They're the same law, it just depends on your perspective. Okay, so this shouldn't actually be surprising at all. So if we look at the production possibilities frontier curve and we say, well, how do we have growth, right? This is how we show growth, right? It's a projection of the frontier, and when we move from one frontier to the next, we see that we can have both more investment goods or more consumer goods, or a combination of the two, or just more consumer goods, or just more investment goods. The point is that a shift outward is this is the production frontier. So this is the sustainable amount of output given that level of technology and resources. What happens if we fall inside the frontier? Can we be inside the frontier? And the answer is absolutely yes. That is when we're in a recession, where we have the potential of producing more consumer goods, we have the potential of producing more investment goods, but something's gone wrong. Now, can we be outside of the production possibility frontier curve? And the answer is yes, but it's not a sustainable amount. Now, there's a little bit of controversy on how you define it, but the way that Garrison defines it is, this is a stable frontier, not just what is the maximum output, right? So you can run really, really fast, but you can't sustain that forever, right? You have to take a break. And so in the same way, what's the sustainable amount of output? And so this is what creates our second graph in our 3-graph model. The third is the market for investable funds or loanable funds. And so we have the quantity of investable funds over here. We have the interest rate, the supply and demand curve. The supply is savings, and so this is people that are setting money aside, and the demand is for borrowers. And as we saw last time, what is savings? Savings isn't just me putting money into the bank. Savings is deferred consumption. Okay? So if a business makes a profit and they retain those earnings, they put those back into the company, that's a form of savings. There's savings then, the supply curve is based on time preference. This is what we talked about in last lecture. It's completely governed by time preference. The demand curve, which is also completely determined by time preference, is the willingness of borrowers, right? They want to borrow money and put it into a project. And so some people are very anxious to borrow money because they see a really golden opportunity and they need to move on it really, really fast. And then there are others who are much more patient. And so when these two groups come together, we see an equilibrium emerge, a harmony in the market, and an interest rate which is based upon time preference then comes about. Okay, so far so good? All right, so let's put the model together. So when we put the model together, we have our interest rates over here, our time preference model, and so here's our equilibrium interest rate, and quantity supplied and quantity demanded meet, but in the loanable or investable funds market, that's just savings equals investment. We then connect that to our production possibility frontier curve with the investments, so these line up. In full employment, we hit the frontier, and that brings us across to our consumer goods, and then that brings us across to our structure of production, so the two C's line up, and then the structured production then slopes downward. It is related to this interest rate, so and we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's not a hard connection, right? There's not a, this is the percentage rate of decline because the interest rate is this percent or anything like that. Okay? So we're gonna use this a little bit, or quite a bit, in a few minutes, but I want to remind you of something that we did last time, and that is, what is the source of economic growth? Because I want to put some growth into this model. So just to remind ourselves, what is the source of growth? Well, this is what I call the magic formula for economic growth. And so this is just basically Say's law, kind of explained a little bit more. So the first part is savings, which leads to investment, which leads to an increase in capital accumulation, which leads to higher productivity, more stuff, that's the technical term the economists use, and that is leading us to higher living standards. Okay, so notice that we cannot consume our way to prosperity. That this is not something that says this is all demand driven. In fact, how do we create growth, future growth? We save today. Okay, so let's suppose people become more patient. All right, well, that leads to several questions. How does this change affect the model? What happens to consumptions and savings? And how do investors and entrepreneurs react to all of this? All right, so let's take a look at our model. We start in equilibrium. Now, what do we assume? We assume that people are going to save or become more patient. Right? So what happens? Well, the first thing we see is a shift in the supply curve. Right? So we're now at S prime. What does that do? Well, we see that interest rates fall, and we have a new savings investment equilibrium that emerges. So let's trace this through. So it comes up in our production possibility frontier curve as a movement along the frontier. Okay, it's a movement along the frontier. Notice how this is already different than, say, a Keynesian model, right? If I fall, if savings increases, notice what happens to consumption. If you are a Keynesian and you see consumption falling, what does that do to your aggregate demand? What does that do to your Keynesian cross graph, right? The sky is falling, right? Austrians recognize that consumption and investment, they can move in opposite directions. In the Keynesian model, everything's fueled by consumption. C and I, they move together. So if you're a Keynesian, the sky is falling. This is awful. If you're an Austrian, you know, you're cool with it. So what do we see happen over here under structured production? Notice, yeah, some sectors see a decrease. Absolutely. Why? Because some people are not consuming as much. Resources are then redirected away from the late stages of production toward earlier stages of production. Now, in the other topic, we got to the micro foundations of how that worked, and we shifted the different supply and demand curves in those micro markets there, right? So you can just reapply that in this. Now, let's add growth. Okay, let's add growth, because remember, this is a static model trying to explain a dynamic thing. Because an increase in savings does what? It leads to economic growth. So it's not just, oh, we're now at this different looking shape of a curve. We need to add growth into this. So the first thing is what? We're adding new savings into this. Okay? What happens? We see the interest rate lower, and we see that we move along the production possibility frontier curve. We're adding to the amount of investment goods. Now what happens? We're going to add the growth. So we put this growth into it, and so we shift out our production possibility frontier. We see that the demand curve then shifts. Why? Because there's new business opportunities that have emerged. Right? That's part of the growth. We have a new equilibrium. Now, I just said that the interest rate's going to go right back to where we started. It doesn't have to be that way. It probably won't be that way because different people will be making the decisions. Different people will be having the money instead. That's okay. But a new equilibrium emerges, and we have a new supply. Our savings equals investment. Now what happens? Well, if we come across to our structured production, this is what we call the more roundabout or more complex or indirect or less direct. But notice that growth isn't even. So what you see is it's going to wobble. Did you see it wobble? Right? It's going to wobble. Yeah. Right? Because growth isn't homogeneous. It's not this shift, right? It's not this. It's going to wobble in the different areas. Okay. So if we save more, what do? We end up at a new equilibrium. Now again, we're doing comparative statics to a dynamic situation, okay? But just because people are now more patient, they're saving more and consuming less today, and then we add growth, look at what happened to consumption then, right? Consumption ultimately went up because of the growth. It's very different than the way the Keynesians and others view the model. Okay. Now, let's suppose that government places a price ceiling on interest rates, okay? Again, it leads us to these questions. How does this change affect the model? What happens to consumption and savings decisions? And how do entrepreneurs react? Okay, again, we start in equilibrium. So what we're going to do is we're going to suppose that there's a price ceiling placed on interest rates. So there's a cap. Okay, what happens if we do this? Well, the first thing we recognize is what? That this is the quantity supplied, this is the quantity demanded. No longer are savings and investment the same. In fact, what we end up seeing is the amount that businesses want, the amount that is actually available, and this then leads to a credit shortage. just like in any other market. This is not some sort of highfalutin surprise. Now, we then encounter the left-hand rule, right, which says that you don't move to this point, you always go to the left of whatever the equilibrium is, right? And that's with ceilings or price floors. So the amount that's actually able to be invested, yeah, this is how much businesses really want, but that's how much is available. And so as a result, what happens to investment? It goes down. Now, what happened to savings? Savings went down. So what's going to happen to consumption? It goes up, and is that what happens? Yes, that's exactly what happens. What do we see happen in the structure of production? We see that it becomes more direct, less roundabout, less complex. Again, we see a shift of resources away from the early stages of production towards the late stages of production. Now, government doesn't often place a price ceiling on it. It's not how they do things, at least not in the credit market. And so we're going to modify that a little bit, and that leads us to this, our business cycle analysis. So, so the Austrians list 5 steps or 5 stages in business cycle. The first is an injection of artificial credit into the system. This creates a boom. Now, today we like to use the word bubbles. That's fine. That's fine. But it's an artificial boom or an artificial bubble. And then that's followed by a crunch. Now, the crunch can either take the form of a credit crunch or a real resource crunch. It's typically both, but one's going to start the other. So, in the last recession, 2007, 2008, it was a credit crunch. In the 1990, 1991 recession, it was a real resource crunch. One causes the other, or then they tend to both kind of fuel each other, but one's going to start it. We will see a crunch. Then we have a recession, or a liquidation phase, followed by, hopefully, a recovery. We've not had much of a recovery recently, but hopefully if we follow the Austrian analysis, we can generate a recovery. So let me give you this analogy. Suppose you have an assignment due. It's due tomorrow, Saturday, 8 a.m. It's got to be an 18-page paper, and your entire grade depends on it. Yeah, you're like, really? Yes, really. Now, it's almost evening. You haven't even thought of a topic, and I need footnotes and everything. So, yeah, not just some, I'm writing out a, no. I want good paper, right? Okay. So, what happens? Well, you start working, 10 o'clock comes around, and you're getting tired. Why? Because you've been up all day, and then 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock, and now you're nodding off. Well, that's no good. You're not even close to finishing with your paper. So what do? Well, you need your caffeine, right? Yummy, delicious Mountain Dew, chock full of caffeine, sugar, yellow number 5. It's fantastic. Now, 2 o'clock in the morning comes around. You're not done. You're typing. You're right? You need more caffeine. Now, does the same amount of caffeine work on you? No, you got to do what? You got to up the dose. That's right. So you're doing what? You're popping your caffeine pills and you're chugging your Mountain Dew. Okay, now 6 o'clock in the morning comes around. Are you done yet? No, I said footnotes. That means references, and then you're like, what? APA style? So now you got to go redo all that. You're nodding off. This isn't any good. What do? Up the dose again. So now you're chugging your Red Bull, your caffeine pills, and your Mountain Dew. And 8 o'clock in the morning, you come upstairs in my office, you slam the paper down, and you mumble something that I clearly cannot understand as you're walking out. And I'm very happy that I don't understand what it is that you're saying. And you go back to your room and you crash. That's a business cycle. That's a business cycle. In this story, the caffeine is the credit. You're pumping the credit into your body. It puts you on an artificial boom, on an artificial high. You're able to do things. But then it wears off. What do? You up the dose. And you up the dose. And you up the dose. So either you're going to stop upping the dose or you're going to crash. Right? That's the credit crunch. Or your body is just going to revolt on you and you're going to fall over. Right? That's the real resource crunch. It's going to happen one way or another. Then what? Then your crash is when your body flushes all the junk out of your system. That's the recovery. Right? It's needed. Okay. So let's put this in a more economics example. So suppose the interest rate's at 5% and your firm is considering a project that's going to give you a 4% rate of return. You going to do the project? No, of course not. So now let's suppose that the central bank lowers the interest rate from 5% down to 3%. Oops. From 3 down to 3%. Now what are you going to do? Right? Your opportunity cost has changed, right? So are you going to do the project? The answer is yeah. What's happening is that the Fed is creating an artificial signal. It's pumping money into the system. It's lowering the market signal, so, or the rate of return, your opportunity cost. And so what happens is that you then say, yes, we're going to make this decision. We're now going to invest. Some people have said, you know, if you just knew the Austrian Business Cycle theory, then you wouldn't fall for that trap. And that's nice, wishful thinking, but think of it as a prisoner's dilemma. Because that's really what it is. What you have is, for me, it's better for me to make that investment, right? Rat my buddy out, than keep my mouth closed. But if everyone kept their mouths closed, if everyone didn't make these malinvestments, of course we would be better off. But the problem is that this is local information versus this sort of macro non-existent information, because money's fungible. You're not going to walk into a bank and the bank says, oh, here's your loan. And you're, whoa, I'm not going to take that money. That's that new money. I know that money. No, thank you. Right? Not going to happen. We can't make that sort of distinction. So during the boom, what we call malinvestments are built up. Okay, malinvestments. And these are unsustainable capital structures built within the economy. What do we see emerge? We see that consumers are going to see the interest rates come down, and they're going to reduce their savings with the lower interest rate, right? So hey, now I can borrow more and finance that washer dryer. Oh hey, I can get that extension on my house, or I can borrow more money from a home equity loan. And so what do we see? We see both an increase in consumption and an increase in investment. So businesses are borrowing money and consumers are reducing their savings. Why? Because the interest rate's so low. All right, so let's put this story into our three-graph model. So what happens? It's close, it's similar. But what we see is a credit injection. So the supply of investable or loanable funds shifts to the right, so it's supply plus the new money. A new interest rate emerges, it comes down, and we see that investment increases. Right, here comes the investment. But that's not the whole story, is it? What do the consumers do? Have the consumers changed their time preference at all? They've not. They didn't shift. They're still over here. Right? They're still over here. They see this lower interest rate, and so the savings drops. Right? What is this? This is the same story we just looked at as the credit shortage story. But instead of having a credit shortage, the Fed has papered over it. And so what happens? Well, with a decrease in savings, what happens to consumption? It also goes up. So we look up there and we see that both investment and consumption have gone up, It's an unsustainable boom. We look over here, what has the investment done? It's added additional stages to the structure of production. But we're not done there, are we? Because what we also have is higher consumption. A friend of mine, John Cochran, describes this as a dueling structure of production. This is not an equilibrium. The consumers are doing one thing, the businessmen, the entrepreneurs are doing something completely different. They're not in alignment. The big thing about Austrian economics is that we talk about equilibrium. We don't like the word because we like to talk about coordination of plans and creating harmonies. This is not in harmony. These plans are not in coordination. So now we're in the boom. What do? Well, the Fed has a choice. As the firms compete for more resources, input prices are being driven up. What happens? So now these firms, they have to start looking for additional funding. So I'm going to build some houses. I'm going to get a 4% rate of return on this project. Interest rates at 5%, not going to do it. We lower artificially the interest rate down to something less than 4, say 3%. So what do? I start borrowing the money and I engage in the project. Now, there's only enough resources to build 4 houses. Can I start 6 houses? Can I start 6 houses? Yes, I can start 6 foundations. So I bought some bricks. I don't have enough bricks for 6 houses, but I've borrowed it and I'm going to finance this as I get going. And so what happens? I start building my houses. But so's everyone else. We're on this artificial boom. We're outside the PPF. So what do? I need more bricks. What's going to happen to the price of bricks is everyone wants more bricks. Price of bricks goes up. So now what do? Well, I need more funding to borrow. I need to borrow more money, especially in the short term, to go get those bricks. So input prices are going up. They're going up pretty fast. Short-term interest rates then, they're also going to go up. Why are they going to go up? Well, short-term interest rates are going to rise because if I don't get those bricks and I don't complete one of the houses, then what's my rate of return on my investment if I don't finish and sell these things? Right? I get 0. It's really important for me to finish these things. Short-term interest rates spike. Central bank then has a decision to make. Either they halt the expansion, because now we're seeing price inflation and interest rate inflation, or they expand the money supply faster. They have to up the dose. Central bank may choose to halt the expansion, increase interest rates. What's going to happen? That's the credit crunch. In 2001, interest rates were about 6%. By 2003, they dropped down to 1%. And then back by 2005, 2006, what did they do? Raised them up to 6%, and in 2007, we're in a recession. How about that? Credit crunch. Or, if they continue to try to up the caffeine, eventually you're going to fall asleep. And that's the real resource crunch. So what's the crunch? When the crisis hits, there are 2 problems facing the entrepreneur. The first is increasing interest rates, and the second one is increasing input costs. Of the 2, which one's worse? It's actually the input costs. With an increase in interest rates, there's an impact on both working and fixed capital. The longer lived the capital equipment, the greater impact on its value. Remember we said, why is it that there's such large swings in the early stages? Well, if we're extracting resources, like mining equipment, right? What sort of equipment is this? Is this, little pieces of wood that break in 3 months? No. These are highly durable, long-lived capital equipment. Interest rates will rise, but the short-term rates are going to increase faster than the long-term rates. So this is my dissertation. Now what is this? What I did is, it's hard to read, I apologize for that, but I have 10, 20, and 30-year interest rates, and I've subtracted from it the 3-month and the 1 year. And these are our treasuries. And so if the long term is greater than the short term, it's going to be above 0. When the short term rises above the long term, in other words, the yield curve flips like this, right? Normally it's like this, but when it flips, that's when it crosses below the 0 line. And what do we see? We see inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, recession, inversion, recession. That's a pretty good track record. We have one false positive in 1967, but in 1967 we had 1/4 of negative growth. Recession is usually 2/4 of negative growth. So I kind of think that this holds. Here's the updated version. I'm sorry. A zoom in on 2000 to today. So yes, I've been keeping up with this. And so where are we heading? I don't know, but you can see that when they decide to drop, it drops pretty fast. Okay. That's the crunch. That explains the turning point. Why do all the entrepreneurs make the wrong decision at the same time? Because they were tricked into it. Where does the crunch come about? Well, it's either the Fed slamming on the monetary brake, causes the credit crunch, or we simply have run out of bricks, and it's a real resource crunch. So what's next? The recession, the liquidation phase. And it's only through the process of converting the malinvestments into productive capital can the foundation of real growth be achieved. And here's a big defining differential between the Austrians and everyone else. Only the Austrians argue that liquidation is a necessary condition for recovery. Everyone else says, try to stop the liquidation. We need to prevent the recession. We need to get ourselves out of the recession and blunt it and do everything we can to stop the downturn. What we have seen, I think empirically, is that we have traded depth for duration. And the human cost of trading that is really, really bad. And here's why. Suppose, like in 1920-21, they had a huge crash. It was deeper than the 1929 crash. Lots and lots of people were thrown out of work. But within a year, they were out of it. So let's suppose that you have 40% of the population thrown out of work. But within a year, you've recovered and most of these people are back in jobs. Can you survive through savings and family and other things for a year without a job? It might be tight, it's going to be awful, but yeah. Now, flip it around. Now we are trading depth for duration. So only 15% of the population have lost their jobs, but it's now 6 years. Can you survive for 6 years without a job? No. And even if you were willing to get back into the workforce and such, right, your skills have atrophied and everything, right? It's much, much more devastating to people to making that change. Okay, so the liquidation phase. The firms that invested during the artificial boom are going to suffer economic losses. They sell their capital equipment at a discounted rate to other firms, and these other firms then can turn into economic profit at the previous prices because these firms have purchased the capital equipment at a discount. Suppose we allow General Motors to truly go under, no bailouts. What would have happened? Is there value in Corvette? Yeah. Is there value in Cadillac? Yeah. Would other firms want to buy Corvette or Cadillac? Yeah. Would they have to pay top dollar for it? No. This is liquidation sale. Everything must go, right? So then what could happen? Someone could buy Cadillac for pennies on the dollar, for a song. And then the very next day, they can start up the assembly line, build the exact same car, sell it at the exact same price, but now their cost structure is so much lower, they can make a profit while GM could not. Markets, capitalism, is about profit and loss. The loss is an important part. The faster that we can convert these malinvestments into new fixed capital equipment, some of it's going to get thrown away. But the faster we're able to do that, the faster we can get back onto that road to recovery. Now, what if I engage in aggregate demand stimulus? We're going to pass the spending bill for shovel-ready jobs. Does that expedite this process? The answer is no. Right? Suppose that you're in a hole, right? You're not making $1,000 a month, right? That's your net revenue is negative 1,000. Now, suppose your gross margin is 25%. So in order to fill that hole of $1,000, that means I need to sell $4,000 worth of product. So government, in stimulus spending, would have to spend $4,000 in order to get me out of that $1,000 hole. A tax cut of, say, $1,000 costs the government $1,000, and I'm out of the hole. The tax cuts are a much better way, an economical way, to get us out of this sort of hole. And it doesn't require, continuous passage or continuous stimulus. So when presidents and politicians say, hey, we're going to spend this money on shovel-ready jobs versus a tax cut, the tax cut is easier.
Do you mean tax cuts or spending cuts?
I mean the reducing the amount of tax revenue that they're coming out of.
What if they just turn around and fill that gap with borrowing?
Who?
The government.
I'm talking about a firm, right? If a firm is a negative net $1,000.
Firms no tax.
No. If let's say a firm is negative $1,000 in their net revenue, right? So they're incurring loss. They're about to go under, that sort of thing, right? Instead of passing stimulus, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a bill, and I'm going to give that money to him, and he's going to go buy $4,000 worth of stuff from you in order to fill that $1,000 hole. Or government can just say, we're going to take $1,000 off your taxes. Now you've filled that hole. Do you see that difference?
But what if they then have to turn around and borrow that $1,000 from somebody else to make up the, aren't you assuming a tax cut and a spending cut?
Yeah, a spending cut would be great.
I mean, it's very rare.
Yeah.
Spending cuts.
Sure.
Usually
Sure, but I'm just focusing on if given the choice between the two policies, right? Setting spending aside for a moment, tax cuts are much better to fill that hole. It's more economical to the government, right? If they're going to do something, this is going to cost them $4,000. This is going to cost them $1,000. So the bottom line, though, is that this conversion from malinvestment is necessary for economic growth to occur, to put us back on that firm foundation. We don't want to go to the dentist. Nobody likes to hear that they have a cavity and that you're going to hear that little sound, right? Nobody likes that sound. But you've been drinking too many sugary sodas. There's too much stimulant, right? That Mountain Dew, right? A lot of sugar there. You have a cavity. What happens if you don't get the cavity fixed? Right? It's a disaster. Nobody wants to go to the dentist. We have to go through the liquidation process. We have to go through a recession in order to reset the capital structure because it's completely misaligned. There are too many things that just don't fit. Will some of the stuff be thrown away? Yeah, unfortunately. Right? This is just wrong. So let's illustrate this recession. So here we are in our artificial boom. let's look at the recession. We start here in the production possibility frontier, and it comes tumbling into inside the frontier. That's a recession. Notice what happens to investment and consumption. They both drop. Then what happens? We can illustrate this in the structured production, where there's a collapse in both the investment and the consumption. And how does this show up over here in our investable funds market? We see that businesses have gone under, and so there's a decrease in demand, and people have lost their jobs, and so their incomes have dropped. So again, I just re-equate it to the original interest rate. There's no particular need for it to be at that interest rate. But what we see then, how far down do we slide? How far down do we go? Well, it depends on how far our savings was. We need to re-equilibrate. And so this amount of savings that was reduced in the boom, that's where our cushion is. That's where our foundation is. And so investment comes sliding all the way down to here, which then shows us the extent of our recession, of our collapse. Okay, so what's recovery? Recovery is the same process as normal growth, right? It's the magic formula. There it is. What do we need to do? We need to increase savings. Now, let's compare and contrast. Let's compare and contrast. Is a non-Austrian model better? What do the Keynesians say? What do the Montreux say? What do the new classicals say? The new Keynesian, real business cycle theorists. What's their causes for the business cycle? What's their cure? Let's take a look. All right, so Keynesians, what's their cause? Everything is tied to expenditures, right? Now, that gives us what? C plus I plus G plus net exports equals Y, right? Yay. Now, what of these things is the driver for the recession? What's the cause? What does Keynes say?
C.
No, not C.
Oh.
If it's not C, what else is there? I. Right? It's I. What happens? Well, it's animal spirits, right? That's what it is. No, not that sort of animal spirit. Oh, Cat Fluffy, what will IBM stock be next year? No, not that sort of animal spirits. What do we mean? He means a herd mentality. Hey, I gotta get to the .com. Everyone's getting to the .com. Everyone, let's get to the .com. Get out of the .com. Oh, everyone, get out of the .com. Get it. We gotta go somewhere safe. What's safe? Real estate. Yeah, real estate. Let's put our money into housing. Yeah, housing. Everyone, put their money into housing. Get out of housing. Housing is horrible, right? That's Keynes. Animal spirits. Herd mentality. Is that really the cause? Yes, that's what he says. What's the solution? More spending on what? Anything and everything. Toys, war, it's all good. And, oh yeah, you read the last chapter of Keynes, what do you say? Socialize investment. That's what we need to do. If we just socialize investment, that'll fix it all. All right. Monetarists, right? Monetarists, Milton Friedman's guys. What does he say? Well, monetary policy is not what people expected it to be. There is a misalignment in expectations. That's what causes the business cycle. Well, it's not really a business cycle per se. It's what Friedman called the plucking model. The what? The plucking model. It looks like this. Imagine you have an inclined plane and tacked under it is like gum or something, and you kind of pluck it down, right? This is Milton Friedman's view of the economy, right? You kind of pluck it down and then it returns. It's not really a cycle theory at all, is it? It's a bust and then a return, or a boom and then a return. I mean, this is what it looks like, right? So you start with your intersection of aggregate supply and aggregate demand, and we do what? We ratchet things up, right? It's that ratcheting up. It's not a boom bust cycle. Okay, so what's the cure? Well, if the problem is that people didn't expect monetary policy to be what it's supposed to be, well, then what we need are rules. We're just going to expand the money supply at 2%. Everyone's going to know that? No more misaligned expectations. Problem solved, right? Never again will we have this problem. Just put a computer in charge. Get rid of the Fed. Put a computer in charge. That's Milton Friedman. New classicals. All right, what do they do? Well, the new classicals use representative agents, and they are identical. They chose penguins. Why? Because you can only use one commodity. They rule out storing, leasing, or capitalizing the value. Therefore, it has to be a service. And to prevent autarky, each penguin cannot render the service unto himself. And so the service is back-scratching. Yes, it's back-scratching penguins. This is their model of the new classicals to explain how our economy works. So, in order to get cycles, local economies have to be separated out. So what do? We put each penguin on separate islands. Right, this is what we get. Then, and they're not really clear on this, money is somehow introduced into this system, and then the trades jump from island to island. And you have local things that aren't really lined up with the macro thing because they're on a different island, and so the price differentials don't really get transmitted, and that's their thing. It's not much of a cycle. It really doesn't explain what we're looking at. Now, let's look at the real business cycle theory, guys. Now, despite the fact that they have business cycle in their name, they're not really a cycle theory. What do they have? They have a cause, which is a shock. It's a shock. What is it? It is sent into the system, right? You have a propagation mechanism, and a shock hits the propagation mechanism, and then that creates these ripples through it, right? So they say, imagine someone throwing a rock into a pond. Right? That's Professor Cordato.
That was a shock.
There was a shock to the system, and it's propagating. Right? Now, just because it's a shock to the system doesn't mean that it has to be a negative shock to the system. It could be a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
It's positive. Now, where did it come from? I don't know. How often does it occur? I don't know. Now, you think, Cwik, come on. You're just making this up. No. There was a Fed economist from Charlotte came out to Mont Olive, and he was telling us all about what happened in the 2008 recession. This was a couple of years ago. This was like 2009, maybe 2010, somewhere around there. And he said, you see, the economy is like a guy on a bicycle. Okay? And some car came along and knocked him over, and now he's in the ditch. So what we need to do is get the guy up out of the ditch and get him back on his way. Where did the car come from? How many cars are there? Is it coming back? Right? This doesn't explain anything. And you say cure? They say cure what? There's no such thing as a cycle. These fluctuations are Pareto efficient responses to shock, so any intervention is bad. That is real business cycle theory. The new Keynesians, their cause is irregular shocks to aggregate demand. Their problems are sticky wages and sticky prices, stop equilibration. We have menu costs which prevent market coordination, and maybe on some low level this might be true. Their cure? We can't fine-tune the economy, but we can boost aggregate demand if the hole is big. And so we can't really fine-tune it, but we can coarse-tune it, right? Coarse being the opposite of fine. So, is this a cycle? Does this really tell us what we want? What's the cure? So while each school has an answer for the cure, not all of the schools have an answer for the cause of the business. That's pretty shocking, right? Huh? Shocking? Shock to the system. It's fun, right? No. None of them explain the cluster of errors well. And Keynes, it's animal spirits. People just get freaked out. It's a shock. It's a car. Just hits a guy on the back. And none of them even attempt to examine why there are greater swings found in the early stages of production and not in the later stages of production. So, riddle me this back. Despite the fact that the Austrians have a coherent theory, a story supported by empirics, a defined cause and a defined cure, and can answer all the questions posed above and more, how come it's we, the Austrians, are the ridiculous French? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. All right, so that is my quick little overview of business cycles. And I have a few minutes here to take questions, which I will be glad to avoid and duck, and I'll answer. So I hope that's sort of made sense. I know it went by very fast. This is a little bit more updated than what you got in your packet, because I had some time this morning to update it. But basically, you guys have all the essential stuff that came in the email. So, questions, comments, insightful witticisms? Roy?
I'll answer that last question about the fringe. Because if you accept the Austrian view, you put a lot of economists out of it.
Government economists.
And I would argue the capital accumulated, the human capital accumulated on most academic economists also goes down the tubes. They have to relearn their economics.
Yeah, there's a path dependency argument.
There is absolutely a path dependency argument.
That's true.
And
But honestly, are we really that ridiculous when we look at these things? No. This is why we're trying to talk to you guys before you develop that path dependency.
then you got a problem getting a job.
You got a job? Not everyone's as awesome as you. That's a good point. All right. Go ahead, Dean.
Well, we're covering this in macro right now.
Oh dear.
When you say that they don't explain where the shocks come from,
Okay, they being which school are we talking about?
probably Keynesians, right?
Okay, the synthesis?
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
There's a synthesis now that exists between the new Keynesians and the monetarists and the new classicals, which is your upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve, your downward sloping aggregate demand, and your vertical long run aggregate supply.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead.
And so they I mean, I know you're being maybe a little bit antagonistic towards that school of thought, but what they say is, when oil prices go from $100 a barrel to $40 a barrel, that is the supply shock.
Yes,
They don't quite explain why oil is dropping from
No,
100 to 40.
no.
but-
The answer is, it's like, well, how do you know this is a shock? And they say, oh, you'll know it when you know it, which is always after the fact, right? It's like, oh, well, that was the shock. Well, that's a little disingenuous. Where does it come from? It comes from anywhere. Anything that is exogenous to the system will shock the system. So sort of by definition, then, you don't have a theory, because it's exogenous to the system, right? So here's the economy, right? Here's the economy, and here's the shock, and it just hits the system.
Right.
You don't have a theory of where the shock comes from, how often it occurs, where it comes from, why is it positive, why is it negative, how large it is. Right? That's not a theory. That's just an after the fact, I'm going to look at some data and I'm going to blame that. Right? That's not. Yes, Roy.
Why can't you say the same thing about the Fed injection of money? You have to have a theory to explain it.
You can have.
you can bring in public choice or whatever, but
Sure.
it's not an endogenous theory. And why isn't just the Austrian theory about a different kind of shock, and that's the shock from new money coming in from the Fed? And unexplained shock because there's, Austrian theory doesn't really explain.
Well,
It just says the Fed injects new money. Thank you.
The earliest version of what we would consider an Austrian business cycle theory is found in Richard Cantion's 1723-ish book. And if you get a chance to read the last couple of chapters, it almost mirrors what was going on in 2007, 2008. It's frightening how close it does. But what Cantion was able to show, and not just when he's looking at the Mississippi bubble and what was there were two at roughly the same time in the early 1700s. But he was also able to show before that the influx of specie of gold and silver coming into Spain when the conquistadors were conquisting, that led to a business cycle, right? And there wasn't a central bank that was doing it. It was just, and that's where we get, Cantillon effects from, is his description of this impact. So it's in modern parlance, yes, we say it's the central bank that's setting this off. Does it have to be a central bank that does this? No. Austrian business cycle theory is a particular slice of what Austrians would call Austrian macroeconomics or capital-based economics, macroeconomics. Because with that 3-graph setup, we're not simply talking about business cycles. We can say that when the Fed engages in credit expansion, we can trace out the consequences. It creates a boom and a bust. Can we have a bust without a boom? Sure, wars cause that sort of stuff, right? And we can use this sort of analysis, this model, to then be able to explain and define those sorts of things. So I think that the Austrian analysis part is much broader than just what we have traditionally put in the box, Austrian business cycle theory. It's much broader than what it was even in the 30s. Dean?
When I look at the Federal Reserve now, running on zero interest, i.e., snorting NoDoz and shooting Mountain Dew for 7 years, 8 years, right?
Right.
They've been just freebasing Mountain Dew, basically.
Sure, okay. Right, okay.
I mean, I'm
not disagreeing with you, right? Okay. So we have QE1, right? then we have QE2, and then we moved into quantitative easing 3, and now we have transitioned into QE forever, right? So forever. There we go. Okay, so yes, the Fed is doing this. We're increasing the money supply by about $80 billion a month.
Seems healthy and
And sustainable.
totally sustainable. Like, as a semi-educated layperson, I look at that and I'm kind of like, this looks completely unprecedented and really scary. And that the economy is relatively flat throughout all this and not overheating. And I realize that, people act purposefully and they know that the Fed is on crack right now, and so they're changing their strategies long-term and short-term in response, so that's part of the reason the Fed is not getting the desired result of, 2.2% inflation per year. But it seems like we're in a boom, but it's a flat boom. And when the bust comes, the reset is going to be huge because we've been stacking up a lot of really bad mojo for almost a decade now.
That's an interesting way of putting it. I'm not talking about the mojo part. I'm talking about the flat boom. So one of the things that economists always deal with are counterfactuals, right? If we did this, then, or if we do that, right? So if this didn't happen, then this would have happened, right? So if we did nothing, right, maybe the economy would be sliding like this.
Yeah.
But you're saying that there's an artificial boom that's putting us on this path. So instead of having normal growth and then having a bubble like this, you're saying that the economy should probably be in decline, and it's this bubble which kind of gets us to flat.
Right.
That's a really scary notion, and I've kind of had that in the back of my mind for a long time, and I didn't want to articulate it, so thanks for making me articulate that, I appreciate it.
Rip that
But
Band-Aid off.
I think that that's a viable interpretation of the statistics. That's not a bad way of looking at what's going on. It's a scary way.
Happy weekend, everybody!
This is all hollow, right?
Yeah.
And of course, where is this all going to happen? It's going to happen. It kind of looks like South Carolina. Isn't that kind of look like?
It's all gonna happen in South Carolina.
All going to happen right there in South Carolina, right?
Yeah, I live up there.
So then there's going to be a contagion, and it's going to hit North Carolina. Anyway.
We need a wall on our southern border.
So
How will I get my firecrackers?
that's right. That's right. So but one of the huge differences, though, that the Austrians, in terms of policy, what they say is, right, what do you Austrians say we should do if we're in a recession? Well, do nothing? Well, no. Austrians don't say do nothing. What are some of the things? Well, first of all, stop doing what caused it, which is what? Credit expansion. Stop that, because all it does is just creates another bubble or artificial boom. So stop doing that. But what are some of the positive steps that we can take? Well, if we recognize that we need to convert the malinvestment into a strong foundation again, what does that mean? We should expedite mergers, acquisitions, and bankruptcies. Let those things move faster. Additionally, what's the cause of economic growth? Savings. So if we can attract more real savings into our economy, that would help. So take the corporate income tax, take it to zero. Would we see investment and savings come flooding into this economy if we do something like that? Yeah. Are these like a magic bullet and the next morning we wake up and everything's going to be prosperous? No. But these are some positive steps that we can take in order to make these things better. If we continue down the path of saying 99 weeks for unemployment benefits, you give people an incentive not to work, they're not going to work. You give businesses a bailout, they're not going to change their behavior. So that's the worst thing that we could do. And drinking more caffeine and trying to inject stimulant into the economy through government spending, what does that do? That destroys investment and that destroys savings. So none of those are good policies. Dean.
So one thing that recently came across my radar was this concept of the Fed now moving away from or into fiscal policy as well as monetary policy, which is what the QE 1 through infinity is basically. They're getting involved in fiscal policy. They're buying and selling stuff, not just standard government securities. They're in the bond markets and they're doing purchasing on Wall Street. And something that, in Dr. Cordato's class that we covered earlier was these, and in macro as well, and in your class, this concept of, having rules that are observable, that are known. I know the game, the rules don't have to be perfect, but if you go into a game of cards and, I got 4 aces. Oh, no, we just changed that. Aces no longer, they count for 1 and not, so as long as you know what the rules are going in and they're not flying all over the place and appearing to be this chaotic system where, insiders get this benefit.
I see what you're saying, but some of the strategies of the new Keynesians and the post-Keynesians are on deliberate deception.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's how they get their policies to work, is by fooling expectations or going against what expectations are. right? So as long as we can, and this was Keynes's way of how do we get people back to full employment? Well, you don't cut wages. Can't cut wages. What do? You have massive inflation, so the real wage drops. So they're fooled into thinking that they're rich, right? That's his policies, right? So it's about tricking people into trying to create these new equilibria. So some people, they want the deception. They want the closed doors and the smoke and mirrors that obscure what's going on, and that's purposeful. So while some people say no, it should be daylight and rules, others are saying it's got to be discretion and behind closed doors, and that's deliberate.
Right. And so tied into that is kind of, and something I think the monetarists have an appeal to me in that, they say the rules dictate,
the rule, right.
Whether it's 2% per year or we look at,
Well, look,
a population number mixed with an employment number and determine, but everybody knows that if these three variables are these, then you can calculate what the money injection is going to be, or whatever
sure,
else.
and this is what the Taylor rule is also trying to do and such. But quite honestly, we covered this a little bit in class with the Rothbard reading, right? If I add shoes into the economy is made better off. If I add fiat money into the economy, what value have I added?
Nothing, right?
Right. So if I put gold into the economy, well, we use gold for other things. There's use value to it. If I put a pair of shoes, or I grow a watermelon, or whatever, and I put that into an economy, the economy's value is grown. But if I simply print out more fiat money, and I inject that into the economy, what value have we added? Right. So this notion of we need more money to keep pace with economic growth or population growth, right? It's not rooted in any normal economic reasoning that I can see. So, I've tried to ask some of the NC State faculty who are the macroeconomists, and I said, why do you want inflation to be greater than 0%? Why do you target a positive amount? They said, well, it gives us more flexibility. I mean, that's their answer, because they want to manipulate. And that does what? That predicates them doing something that you're unaware of to achieve some sort of result, right? When they use the word manipulate, that's very purposeful. That's deliberate.
Right. And I think it's easy too for people to fall into a trap, right, where you think that, well, if the population's increasing and productivity is going up and all these things, that a zero inflation rate would mean we're going to run out of money. Right, where the amount of species in population relative to the amount of wealth, the real stuff we have, is going down. Right, the ratio
how do you run out
changes.
of money?
I'm not saying that.
As an
I'm not saying
I can
that.
run out of money. In fact, I've done that. We're like, I ran out of money. I can't buy that.
No, you know what I'm saying though. Like if you have $10 printed for the economy in this room,
right.
And all of a sudden 20 people come in and they're all doing things that, a zero inflation rate really in reality would increase the amount of money in circulation.
Okay, there are two definitions of inflation. There is the classical definition and the modern definition. Modern definition is based on the aggregate price level. So if you see an increase in aggregate price level, that is inflation. The classical definition is there an increase in the money supply? So if I have a balloon and I blow air into it, I'm inflating the balloon. If I have an economy and I'm putting money into it, I'm inflating, right? The other one is a relative statistical measure that's based on this sort of level, right? And so when you're saying that as people are added, right, they're not added in aggregate, right? Well, 20 people show up. Well, that's not how things work in an economy, right? It's all about relative price changes and at the micro level. And so when we look at things like technology with our cell phones and our computers, what do we see? We see gently falling prices, right? We see deflation and we see quality going up, and nobody's screaming about those sorts of things. Now, take that same notion and spread it throughout the entire economy, right? And so, okay, so instead of everyone having $1, we each have 50 cents. Oh, we have more people? Okay, instead of everyone having 50 cents, we each have a quarter, right? Or whatever, right? And so the unit of measure might be smaller, right, as the money appreciates, but there's no notion of why we should use one money over another, right, as some sort of objective thing. Let different monies compete against one another, right? Let there be an open competition.
Right,
Between
fair enough. But what I was saying was that and I didn't mean to imply that I thought it was correct, but that it's easy to fall into thinking that, you need to have a money supply that's growing constantly to match the increases in output, to match the increases in population.
I understand that.
So it's easy to kind of fall into this trap of thinking that, of course the money supply has to be increasing constantly and prices should be going up because,
I understand that is an error.
Yeah.
That a lot of people have, but it's an error, right? Just because a lot of people think something doesn't make it true.
Right. And in reality, and whether or not there's any way of getting to that, but that a money supply would expand as needed.
Well, if we're looking at what
talking about real
what is
money,
the base of money, right? And if money is gold, well, there's a cost to extraction, right? So can you put more gold into the system? Sure, right? You can sell jewelry, and that puts gold into the system. You can extract it from the ground, that puts gold into the system, right? If we're looking at Bitcoin, seems to be that there's going to be a cap. I don't know if that's going to hold up or not, but that's what they say. And then there is no more. If it's fiat money, it's just typing stuff into a computer, and you can have as many zeros as you can type.
Right.
So, anyway, yes.
Another thing to point out is that the whole Austrian business cycle theory is independent of the price level.
You didn't hear me talk price level in this.
So, let's grant that you're, you increase the rate of growth of money supply consistent with some rate of growth in the economy. The fact is that you are keeping interest rates lower than they would be.
Yes. Artificially low.
Artificially low, and therefore not reflecting intertemporal preferences and intertemporal plan coordination. So
yes,
regardless of that, you're still going to distort intertemporal plan coordination.
Yes.
And you're still going to have a business cycle.
Yes.
So, okay, make all those arguments, but then how are you going to prevent the business cycle?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that
that's very true. And we read an article earlier in Austrian Economics Forum, maybe 2 years ago, on Mises's non-neutrality of money. Maybe we should revisit that again, because it's such an important thing that says that money is never neutral, it cannot be neutral. It has to have real impacts on relative prices. And so Roy is absolutely correct.
you're still going to have injection effects.
You're going to have injection effects, you'll have Cantillon effects, real wealth transfer, and misalignment of the capital structure. So, all right, well, I have to go stab some people at fencing. So it's been very, very pleasurable to speak to you guys one last time. And we're going to have some stuff. One more this semester, or are we going to, no? We're going to do it in the spring?
It looks that way right
Yeah, I
now.
think let's put it off, and then we'll start with some micro stuff.
Okay, so we're going to do readings and such,
buffer
discussion groups as
economics,
opposed to lecture format in the future. So that means homework for you guys.
Yeah, we'll probably start with competition theory, and sort of do market failure related stuff.
So stuff Roy's interested in, not this stuff.
We spent a semester on macro, maybe since Austrian economics is really about micro, we should.
Yeah, maybe not. All right, well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Cwik.